Good morning, everybody. I'm Nicola Barrett, Chief Corporate Learning Officer at Emory Executive Education at Goizueta Business School, and it's wonderful to welcome in February 2024 with a business over breakfast on the first of the month. There are very few parts of a business-to-business enterprise that have seen more disruption than the sales function. If you think about sort of the last 5 years, it's been a period where we've seen sales forces roiled by the global pandemic. Suddenly nobody wanted to talk. Then uncertain recovery, sort of swings in demand, swings in supply, and compounding that were really challenges in terms of tightening capital, an uncertain labor market, quickening pace of AI's impact. And so the sales function, particularly the business-to-business sales function, has really had to rethink and adapt to all of those changes. Today, Bob Kelly, who's our faculty presenter, is going to discuss these disruptive changes, how they've affected businesses' go-to-go market strategies, emerging trends in business-to-business, how critical management decisions impact firms' growth prospects and sales performance, and where high-performing firms are focusing their sales-related investments. Bob is a Goizueta alumnus and an adjunct lecturer in Goizueta's MBA in Executive Education program, and he currently teaches a graduate course on sales management and sales force effectiveness, which anybody who wants to enroll in from this audience and others, we'd love to have you be part of it. More on that in the chat. Bob has had a varied career after his MBA. He worked in management consulting. He worked in marketing strategy for MCI WorldCom, and then as vice president of sales operations and strategy at Genuine Parts Company. And in 2010, he founded the Sales Management Association, which is a global cross-industry association for sales leadership and sales force effectiveness. And it serves members in 100 countries with benchmarking, research, training, and conference. I'm going to hand over to Bob shortly. As we do with all of these business over breakfast, Bob's going to talk for about 35 minutes and then spend time on your questions. So please put them in the Q&A function. If you've got any questions that you really want or things that you want clarified, please put them in the chat, and we'll try and answer those along the way too. But before I hand the baton to Bob, just a few upcoming program offerings. So if you're seeking to level up your career, invite you to check out some of our short courses. We'll post them in the chat. There's the upcoming managerial leadership program, which is a modular program for those folks who are really wanting to spend time on improving their capabilities as a manager and a leader in their organization. Leveraging AI for business, which is so critical these days for senior managers and leaders to understand what is the impact of AI, how do I use it, how do I think about my strategy in terms of that technology. And as I said before, the sales and sales management, this is an MBA level accelerated course. So if you take that, you get to learn alongside Bob, and you also get credit from Emory University. So Bob, that's enough from me. I'm going to pass over to you.
Nicola, thank you so much. It's great to be with you. I just would like to, on a personal note, thank you for having me. And I'd like to welcome the audience and appreciate your interest in this most vital of topics. It's a slightly unusual topic in that business schools often don't spend a lot of time on sales. And this is despite its magnitude in the business world and its importance. More on that in a moment. But I'd like to just share, maybe before we get started, a just kind of personal reflection about sales and about how we teach it in the business school. I mean, the first thing I've noticed, being kind of an accidental educator, an adjunct, is that educating or teaching really is a lot like selling. I mean, you're in a position of having to persuade someone about what's important. And when it goes wrong, it's indistinguishable, from a bad salesperson and a bad teacher, both sort of standing in front of a bored audience, answering questions that no one's really asking. I've found that the experience that I've had in my career, sort of working in and around sales organizations, has given me a lot of parallels in this newer career that I've had in teaching students. So I just welcome the interest in this topic, and in today's presentation, I hope to give you just a little bit of a feeling for what we see as important, both in my role as an educator and also in my role as running the Sales Management Association, where we have a very large audience of management practitioners. So I'll be drawing on a little bit of research from the association and trying to just kind of run through a set of topics that I think are vital right now when we think about sales in the B2B context. So let's get to it. I'm going to do my best to share some slides here. And I'll give you a quick sense of what I'd like to cover today. I'd like to talk about maybe things that are important to know about sales. This is often where I start with the MBA class, keeping in mind many are what I would consider sales tourists. They're not necessarily headed toward a career in the sales organization, but they're very interested in understanding what's happening in the sales function. So I'm going to start really with some basic ideas and then give you a feel for the typical operating context that sales organizations function within. We'll talk about what's changing in sales. So the short answer, by the way, is everything. But let's examine just a few things that are driving that change and what it means for the practice of management. And in particular, where are the specific areas that managers can really have an impact on sales effectiveness? So that's what I hope to cover. We'll go fairly quick, and along the way, very much welcome your questions and comments. Please submit them anytime. Nicola has been kind enough to agree to just sort of butt in if there's something that you think would be worth addressing in stream. Otherwise, we'll save ample time at the end to address your questions. All right, well, let's start with a few things that are important to know about the sales function. The first thing that is important to know is that it's very big. It is a huge part of the economy. In fact, it's probably incorporates about 10% of the U.S. workforce, around 18 million workers in the labor force. This is a slightly difficult number to pin down. It almost certainly underestimates a huge number of people doing part-time direct selling. The 18 million number is probably made up of more or less one-third direct, one-third sort of B2B salespeople and two-thirds workers who are selling direct to consumer in any number of retail or other direct-to-consumer jobs. So the amount of money spent on the sales organization and salespeople is something equivalent to around 5% of U.S. GDP. It's around $1 trillion. On average, firms spend something on the order of 10% of firm revenue on the sales function, typically in the form of compensation to salespeople. That's the single biggest expense. And this number, it represents at least two, probably much closer to 3 times the total amount spent on media ad spending in total, and at least 10 times the amount of expenditures on digital marketing. So it is indeed a very big number. Other things to know. The next thing, perhaps the most important, is that it is value generating. It is, in fact, somewhat easy to make a case that it represents the best return on investment of any investment in the marketing mix. So in a meta study of many hundreds of studies that were indexed and sort of normalized, an academic from the University of Kansas, Murali Mantrala, estimates that the personal sales elasticity is 0.31. This compares to an equivalent number of 0.22 for advertising investments. This number essentially means that for every dollar invested in personal selling, firms receive an average of $1.31 in return. So personal selling, by the way, that's sort of the academic parlance for face-to-face, person-to-person selling in sales organizations, personal selling. The next thing I'd have you know is that it is extremely varied. Now, this is often not something that new students consider about the sales organization, but sales jobs are amazingly diverse. There are hunters and farmers, inside salespeople, outside salespeople, all kinds of specialists, generalists, subject matter experts, sales engineers, just a almost limitless variety of sales roles, and also selling and the issues affecting sales effectiveness are highly contextual. They are highly dependent on the operating context that a company works in, not just its industry, but its particular markets, its particular set of products and services that make up its offering. And this is important to keep in mind. It's especially important, and I find, one trait of many sales leaders is that they're the word is a little provincial. Sometimes they find something that worked in company X is bound to work in all other companies. In fact, this is often not the case. So it's important to understand what are the context dependent drivers of sales effectiveness, and we'll cover those a bit. And then the last thing I'd point out is that that the sales function is a highly change intensive function. As Nicola pointed out in her introduction, it's perhaps been the subject of more change than any other function in the enterprise. And it is continually beset by change. Let's look at some numbers that bear this out. This is from Sales Management Association research. This is a deep dive research piece that we did on change management in sales organizations. We asked organizations over the past 3 years, characterize the amount of change in your organizations from a scale of low to moderate to high. So you can see on the left that firms indicate that over the past 3 years, 80% of these firms indicate that they've experienced overall a high degree of change. And looking forward, 92% expect to experience a high degree of change. Incidentally, we also ask, how quickly is this happening? Faster or slower? As you might guess, the majority indicated that it's happening faster. 67% in our study said change is happening faster. Now, there's sort of a fun punchline with this study. We did this in December of 2018. This is on the perhaps 18 months from the global pandemic that introduced perhaps the most amount of change that sales organizations have ever seen. So their expectation of change increasing in speed and magnitude was not at all wrong. So this is kind of what the period that we're coming out of, a period of great change, but set against almost constant state of change as a normal resting state in sales organizations. So very change intensive environment for the sales force. What exactly are we talking about when we say things are changing? Here's just another quick peek, a little slightly more detailed view of things changing in the sales function. We ask about a range of topic areas related to management practice and in sales. So we found of these 9 things that we asked about, 62% or more of firms expect a high degree of change in the future. So beginning with the types of sales jobs and sales roles in the organization, 62% of firms expect those to have a high degree of change over the next 3 years. followed by incentives. That was actually ranked number 6. The customers and prospects targeted. So the sort of strategic idea of, who will we focus on? Almost 70% of firms expect high degree of change there. The use of analytics in decision making. This is something that about 3/4 of firms expect to have a high degree of change in, and we've certainly seen that be the case. And then at the top of this list, just marginally so, is this notion of how salespeople deliver value. That is, what is it that we do that customers find useful as an organization? So, interesting thing about this list. So there are some tactical things in here, and of course there's some strategic things. The changing the incentive plan, for example. This is something that firms routinely do. I'd put that in the tactical category. Changing who's targeted, which customers, which segments, which markets we target. For sales organizations, this is a strategic decision. This notion about how we deliver value, it's almost beyond that. I'd call it an existential problem, really. And it's probably accurate to use that term to describe the amount of change happening in many sales organizations. Many are, in fact, looking at their typical sales role and having somewhat of the business equivalent of an existential crisis. What is it that our people do that actually is useful and valuable in the wider world, and how can we optimize that role? So anyway, that's the landscape of change in sales organizations. Let's take a quick look at what's driving all this change. And the answer is not a simple one, or a simple set of drivers. There are many things implementing or affecting change. Let's consider 3 in very broad terms. I want to talk about first, the buyers are changing. What buyers want, their needs, and also their preferences and biases, those are changing. Secondly, I want to talk about the advent of technology that's impacting the practice of sales management and selling itself. These are productivity tools, and I want to talk about their role. And then thirdly, I want to talk about a little bit of labor economics as it relates to the sales function. So let's start with the first thing.
Bob, just a point of clarification. Somebody in the Q&A did say your source for change in sales is from 2018. So can you comment about how this has changed over the last 5 or so years?
Yeah, we see, I use that data. First of all, it's the most recent data we have on this battery of questions. But I find it interesting that it predates the pandemic. Now, we have seen, obviously an acceleration of change. So these things we find are simply more amplified. The challenges associated with that set of changes has certainly not diminished.
Thank you.
I hope that addresses the question. Feel free to follow up, questioner. Now, on to the first of our list. How are buyer preferences changing? I want to reproduce a chart that might be the 10 millionth time it's appeared in a PowerPoint slide deck. It's from research that's a little bit head-scratching from an organization at the time called the Corporate Executive Board. It's now actually part of Gartner, in which the researchers estimate that buyer expectations have changed to the degree that buyers now have completed 57%, an oddly specific number, 57% of the buying process before they initiate contact with a sales organization or a salesperson. So this, whether or not this number is accurate, is perhaps beside the point, because it does speak to a fundamental truth that's immediately recognizable by people in sales, which is buyers have access to much more information. As a result, they no longer rely on salespeople for this fundamental notion of education and help me understand what options are available. In fact, buyers want to do that on their own. And they're not only less likely to contact a salesperson, they're much less receptive to being contacted by salespeople as a result. They have much less time for the perceived low value activity of hearing a pitch from a salesperson before they've evaluated options and ideas on their own. So this is making sales much more challenging than it was, say, just a few business cycles ago. Now, let's jump over to some other things happening. The next thing I want to talk about are these productivity tools in the sales organization. I mean, over the past few decades, we've seen the adoption of CRM software, Salesforce, for example, or HubSpot, or the Microsoft Dynamics product. These are pervasive tools. They've really become a de facto platform for accurately might use the term operating system for sales organizations. They've been joined by this sort of set of maybe subordinate platforms that are also becoming very popular. And they include things like incentive compensation management software. It, by the way, has morphed a bit into something called sales performance management software, which manages not only incentive comp, but sort of ancillary disciplines that are important for the comp plan. So territory optimization, for example, or quota management. Other platform type products include sales enablement, that sort of unfortunately named sales enablement category, which helps distribute content and provide training kind of in context to salespeople. And also sales engagement software, which helps companies orchestrate kind of outreach to customers. This is the software that those firms that pester you are using to create cadences, so-called cadences of emails and telephone calls, and managing that in a way that can scale efficiently. And then beyond this level, there are many, literally like seemingly millions of apps, point solutions that do one thing or another, help you identify leads or clean or qualify those leads, help you create a proposal, or help you do any number of tasks or solutions that salespeople used to spend much more time on. So it's worth asking the question, with all this technology and automation, why aren't salespeople disappearing? When will they start disappearing? I'm going to read an unfortunate quote from Gerhard Schwantner, who predicted that, this was, I believe, back in 2010, of the 18 million salespeople currently in the United States, fewer than 3 million will be needed by 2020. So we know that was a bold and reckless prediction that didn't come to pass. And so if we're asking the question, when will we start to disintermediate a lot of these sales roles? The best answer I have for you today is, well, not yet. And why is this? Well, number of reasons, but among them are sort of the imperfect outcomes of a lot of this sales technology. Imperfect from the standpoint, at least, of replacing what salespeople do. We find also that there are some, deficits in effectiveness in how we implement this stuff. CRM, for example, in a study we did, we find that 63% of firms have a return on investment in CRM that is below their expectation. Their estimates of adoption, satisfaction with adoption, are quite similar. I think the number 62% are below satisfactory in adoption. We find also that a lot of the tools overlap. It's difficult to manage them all. Often also these firms assemble, these point solutions into a so-called sales stack, which can be effective for a moment, but it can also become what I like to call a dog's breakfast. It's just a lot of stuff and difficult to keep up with, and a lot of things in the bowl. So these things begin to explain why we've not seen a reduction in headcount, at least in the number of salespeople. But we have seen some other things worthy of note related to the use of sales jobs. And I want to point out a couple of these. The first thing is what's often referred to as bifurcation of sales jobs. Let me try to explain this idea. So it used to be, even just a few decades ago, that a typical sales role would have a range of customers and sort of types of sales, ranging from very transactional to very consultative customers that might want and value some additional service or expertise. And then on the left side of this curve, it would be customers who simply want a good price and a speedy transaction. Well, many sales people had a mix of these things that might look like this bell curve. And what we're finding now is that this curve is kind of inverted. We're seeing a large increase in the number of lower skill sales jobs, a lot of inside sales jobs, and also increased investment in higher skill sales workers. These are people who are managing strategic accounts, for example. And so this is the first thing that's happening with sales jobs, this bifurcation. And another thing that's happening is just increased specialization. I mean, here are a couple of, graphics from the module that I do on sales organization design. And, these ways of specializing: on the left, a specialist based on where in the sales process they work, and on the right, based really on sort of the size and type of company or prospect that is targeted. These are very common. They essentially take advantage of the really fundamental principle of the division of labor, which says, if you're specializing work, then you're reaping benefits of increased productivity overall in your workforce. And sales organizations have managed to do this in part through the use of technology, which helps to coordinate all these multiple roles. So let's just acknowledge then that while the number of salespeople may not necessarily be declining precipitously, it is being reallocated. And what we see in many organizations are these often disruptive reorg initiatives that are changing sales jobs, changing sales roles, and doing that in an attempt to recast strategy and the way they approach the market. And then the last thing I want to talk about is just the economics of sales workers. So in the U.S., where unemployment has been interesting to watch, and as it continues to decline, many parts of the country are seeing these broad-based worker shortages. We're also seeing this in sales organizations. And so many organizations are simply finding it difficult to find qualified workers. This is all, despite some well-publicized reductions in force in some sectors, including technology firms. But in many pockets, the opposite is happening. We're finding it difficult to find workers. At the same time, and this is no surprise to students of the business world, is that the nature of the workforce is changing. We're seeing a shift in demographics toward younger workers. So declining supply of workers and a shift in demographics to younger workers. These younger workers are wanting younger worker things that older managers are also sometimes finding difficult and awkward to provide. But it's important for us to understand these things, and important for employers to appeal to these new generations. And this is a challenge for many. We're finding in this is Sales Management Association data that as a result, we're seeing some pressure, especially in top sales talent, which is beginning to leak out, and firms are finding retention to be a problem. They're finding it much more challenging to compete based on pay in the labor market. 83% expect this to be increasingly more challenging over the uh, in the coming year. Similarly, companies are finding it difficult to compete for new hires, to find new sources of new hires. A few other factoids here. We're finding in terms of salesperson turnover, about 2/3 of it is voluntary. That is voluntary from the salesperson's perspective. Salesperson elects to leave. And this is up from what we saw in 2017, which was around 56%. And who's leaving? Often it's high performers who are leaving. So in total, we find 89% of this voluntary turnover is from satisfactory or high performing salespeople. So again, this is quite a challenge for sales organizations. Often also we find a lot of the turnover actually comes in an employee's first few months with the organization. So it's a failure really in onboarding, even if it's a good hiring decision. If we cannot onboard that person effectively, that's a period in that employee's tenure where they're very vulnerable to turnover. But we do see that firms that are retaining talent are competing at a significant advantage. There's a substantial performance advantage that accrues to these firms that have figured out how to retain key salespeople. So in a study we did, we found that the median rate of retention was 85%. This is on an annual basis. So half the firms in our study retained less than 85% of their salespeople, and half retained more than 85%. Of those in the upper 50th percentile in salesperson retention, they were substantially more likely to meet the firm sales objective, something like on the order of 80% more likely to achieve firm sales objectives. So we're finding that there's some clear correlation between being able to retain employees in the sales organization and firm sales performance. Okay, let me talk now and just spend a few minutes on this topic, which is what are managers doing given this set of challenges and many others? What do we see smart managers doing in those sales organizations that are performing well? I want to call out 3 or 4 things for your consideration. The first thing is that they are building sales forces that are able to change and adapt. So creating a change-capable sales force is extremely important. As you might imagine, we saw this during the pandemic. Our studies showed that the firms who had a capability of implementing change in the sales force were 4 times more likely to achieve the firm sales objective. This is easier said than done. How do you create a change-capable sales organization? A couple of things to call out here. First, you can value adaptiveness in the people that you hire, and especially in the managers that you hire. So this means often not focusing on the ideal candidate for a very narrowly defined sales role, but a candidate that can thrive in an organization where roles change. The second thing is investing in development for salespeople. So salespeople are able, learning and development goes hand in hand with being able to change and adapt. And so we find that firms investing in development for salespeople are much more capable when it comes to change leadership. And thirdly, and this is an old saw, is invest in culture and have a conscious approach to managing and stewarding a positive sales culture. I'll talk a little bit more on that topic in a moment. A few other things. Really effective sales organizations are competing for talent, just like they compete for customers. And this hasn't always been the case. In fact, many firms really don't think about it this way. But with declining sources of talent And with the changing nature of talent, it's important for organizations to, as one recruiting firm I like. I noticed something on LinkedIn. They posted something along the order of treating recruiting like marketing and making hiring decisions like you make sales calls. That is, being able to make a compelling case for why it's a good idea to come to work for your company, having a compelling employment value proposition, and winning, not just the decision for a recruit to come to work for you, but in their first few months, winning that new employee experience and helping them be successful. As promised, a bit more about culture. We did some very interesting research last year on the relationship of so-called positive sales cultures with sales force productivity. And we found a lot of interesting things. We found, as you can see in this chart on the right, that firms that have a so-called effective culture, a positive sales culture, as we defined it in this study, were much more effective in a range of really strategic areas, competing for new hires, retaining high-performing salespeople, motivating the right kind of effort in the sales organization. This gave them an enormous advantage. The Drucker quote comes to mind about culture eating strategy for lunch. Culture's been snacking on sales organizations for quite a long time, many of whom have, toxic, mercenary cultures that can do damage in the long run. So more things we learned about these positive sales cultures. They're easiest actually to manage in medium-sized companies. They're challenging in small companies and in very large companies. Middle-sized companies were defined as those with at least 20 directly employed salespeople and fewer than 450. So that represented the middle 50% of our study. That's sort of the sweet spot for being able to manage a positive and distinctive sales culture. So these cultures, these positive cultures, they're important for a number of reasons that are interrelated. They create compounding benefits in being able to attract and keep people and being able to adapt to changing circumstances. They are, in our view, culture that is an emerging vector of competitiveness for firms and an increasingly important place for managers to be attentive. And then lastly, I'll talk about this technology. We also did some interesting research. Oops, that's too many. Some interesting research on when technology works. There's plenty of technology spend in sales organizations that is ineffective. In those where it is effective, though, it's very powerful and creates a powerful performance advantage for sales organizations. What are the characteristics of those organizations that implement CRM, for example, implement CRM effectively? We found 3 hallmarks, and these are each presented from the salesperson or the user's perspective. In these organizations effective in CRM, they created an integrated experience for salespeople. That is, salespeople didn't have to log into many places. They found the CRM kind of a nexus of the information they need to do their job. They, secondly, create value for salespeople. In fact, we ask a question of salespeople, why do you use CRM? And the scale of response on one end is something like, my manager makes me, and on the other end is, I get a lot of value from using CRM. So we found in the firms effective in CRM that the preponderance of responses were on the value creating for salesperson side of that scale. And then thirdly, they actually save time for salespeople. Incredibly, absurdly might be a better term to use. We found that many implementations of technology, in fact, don't save time. They actually make many tasks take longer to do. And in fact, this destroys value. steal sales capacity, and firms lose sight of this important fact. So where CRM is effective and where other technology investments are effective, they're actually creating value. And one marker for that is they are saving time in typical salesperson tasks. These aren't the only things that should represent goals for a technology implementation. But without these three things, I would suggest that you have a difficult road ahead in expecting technology investments to be effective. All right, well, I have reached the end of my allotted time. I'm going to open it up for some questions here, and I hope that you found that helpful. Before I do that, though, I'd like to make a few brief appeals. The first is, as Nicola mentioned, I'll be teaching a class this spring in May. It's a course on sales and sales management. We'll touch on the issues that I've focused on here, as well as many others, and talk about the effective sales force, where management can impact effectiveness in sales organizations, and many other interesting topics related to both selling and managing the selling effort. And so that's coming up in May 4th through 10th. The second thing I'd like to mention is a conference that Goizueta has been gracious enough to host for the Sales Management Association. This is a conference that we've done. This will be our 11th year doing the conference. It's the Salesforce Productivity Conference, we call it, managed by the Sales Management Association. It is March 12th and 13th at Goizueta. We'd like to welcome the Goizueta community to this event. You'll be hearing at the conference from some Goizueta academics, including Jag Sheth and Ben Kaczynski, Sandy Japp, some other academics as well, including Michael Ahern. He's sort of the acknowledged leader in academic research focused in sales, and a range of senior leaders from industry. The president of corporate sales at United Parcel Service will be speaking. Senior VPs from companies like Mohawk Industries, Great Dane, and Cox Automotive, all Georgia-based companies. The chief revenue officer of the Atlanta Hawks, who will explain how they're continuing to fill the arena despite as underperforming team. Spoken like a true, I'm a season ticket holder, so I've got a vested interest in that, and looking forward to having Andrew Saltzman from the Atlanta Hawks there. So anyway, I hope you can join us, and to make it easier for you to do that, I have a registration code for you, which is EAGLE spelled backwards, ELGAE. You can use that if you register for our conference, and you'll receive actually a pretty substantial discount on registration. I think the whole thing is $4.95. So thank you for your time and attention today. If you'd like to reach me, I'm happy to send you slides or answer any questions offline that you have. And Nicola, I'll turn it over to you for any online questions that we can get to today.
We have a lot of questions, and just to let everybody know, the video of this is available to everybody, and we'll be posting that, sending that out, and then also posting it on our LinkedIn. So you can get, if you want to share this or look at it again, it's available to you. We have quite a few questions. Alicia asks, are employers concerned about developing talent for them to move on because there are only limited leadership roles? So I think what she's saying is developing talent because there's very little or limited career path in that organization. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a common objection, if you will, from management. Why should we educate salespeople only to have them leave us? In fact, I think there's a pretty compelling reason to do that very thing. Now, granted, it's much easier if you're in an organization that is growing and creating additional professional opportunities for people. Then you can offer, more opportunity for advancement. but that's not always the case. It's not always easy to do that. I would suggest that you develop people anyway, because you'll find that you're able to attract the kind of people that you need. And in fact, many people, being able to work at a firm and build your inventory of marketable skills is valued by the very best workers. I think the benefits of doing that, in my view, outweigh the potential risk of seeing them move on. Is my short answer. Maybe not so short.
There's a question from Jeff around, do you have any thoughts or tips on how inside sales teams could be trained to be more consultative? He's trying to formalize training. He's tried formalized training and he's having difficulty asking them to change behaviors long term. So how do you think about moving the sales approach to be that more consultative approach than sort of the features benefits type of stuff that used to be the case?
I mean, everyone makes this journey from just selling stuff to being a more valued partner to customers. So we find that this is less of a training problem and more of a sort of a system and coaching problem. So let me try to explain that. So if there is an acknowledged way of providing consultative value to a firm, it needs to be codified how we do that. What for example, is our defendable value proposition in working with a firm? What makes it worth paying more to us to provide that sort of additional level of value over and above just product alone or service alone? And secondly, how do we reinforce this? Well, firms need to figure out what works, and then they need to coach that and their salespeople. So this is often done. From what we gather, this is becoming a more important part of the first line sales manager job, has been over the past few decades, is working to make salespeople better through active coaching. It is distinct from simply providing feedback. It is often focused on understanding the root cause issues behind developing very specific skills, and it often involves creating practice assignments that help hone those skills. So it's actually a fairly complicated answer. I hope I've touched on at least a few things to consider, and would be happy to explore more about those ideas.
And there's several questions about it. I did notice that there was a comment in the chat. Dr. G said, an adage to consider: what if we train them and they leave? What if we don't train them and they stay?
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, that's actually quite astute. I mean, we do find that firms, for example, that aren't very good at onboarding or training often have pretty high rates of retention, and in particular, phrased a different way, they have low rates of desirable turnover, desirable from management's standpoint. Managers are so apprehensive that they can't get someone else in place and productive quickly enough, or even at all. So they allow mediocre performers to sort of linger. So yeah, it's well put. Thank you, commenter.
Michael asks, do you have any estimate or research showing the average tenure of a professional B2B sales manager today?
Of a manager, I'm not sure I do. Yeah, I'm assuming that you're interested in like a first line sales manager role. Sadly, I do not.
And I wanted a follow-up question. Where are the high-performing salespeople going to? Are they going just to another firm? Is it sort of playing musical chairs, or are they doing something different?
Mhm. Yeah. So they are a valuable commodity in a market that's very active. Consider the questions we've just been thinking about, right? Why should I train people? Well, let's say you answer the question in a different way, and you say, "I'm not going to train people. I'm gonna buy. I'm not going to build salespeople. We're going to acquire labor." And many firms actually follow that strategy with sales talent. So there are ample buyers for salespeople of proven worth. Um, and so that's kind of what's happening. They're often outbidding uh, an incumbent employer for the same kind of work. Um, and often there is, there are reasons for a salesperson, a high-performing salesperson, to be unhappy where they are. So there's always the grass is always greener syndrome as well. So I don't know that it's any more complicated than that.
Right. A couple of sort of interrelated questions. Amy asks, how do you recommend investing or communicating culture to a sales force which is largely remote? Somebody else asked about maximizing effectiveness for someone in sales who is part-time. And then asked about how do you measure adaptiveness? And I feel those three things perhaps all are interrelated.
Yeah, let me just make sure I understand. So the first part was, how do you manage a remote, or how do you build
how do you communicate a positive culture to a sales force that's largely remote?
Yeah.
How do you do that and help them become effective when they're either remote or even part-time? And then I think probably part of the answer has got to come is about adaptiveness. And then William follows on with, how do you measure that?
Sure. Okay. So the first question is, how do you manage a remote workforce? We didn't really touch on it. I didn't in my presentation, but one of the kind of enduring effects of COVID is this, ongoing embrace of remote work. We see it in the fact that many firms have adopted some really good tools to make workers effective and productive remotely. We also see it in preference among workers, especially young workers. Many value the ability to work remotely because it gives them a little more freedom in their life. I mean, but I find that so to begin to answer the question, it's more difficult, quite obviously, and so managing a remote workforce is, I think, best done with episodes of getting together. So hopefully there is an opportunity to blend both a remote and in-person set of interactions. That's the first thing I'd say. And, so you have to really optimize those in-person interactions. The second thing I'd say is that the key thing about building culture in really any organizations, but especially in sales organizations, is solving problems together as a team. What problems can you work on that begin to characterize how you approach difficult challenges? So there are a number of ways to do this without spending a lot of money or pulling a lot of people out of work to go to a retreat or something like that. You can use peer-based approaches to attacking different problems. You can circulate and distribute wins or best practices among the sales organization. And these are good ways to kind of build culture and to build a little bit of esprit de corps as well. Okay, so I suppose I'm only able to retain one question at a time. The third part of the question was,
how do you measure adaptiveness?
Well, good question. I mean, there's the old-fashioned way, which is, are we making our number given that everything in our market has changed? Can we, for example, take a sales process that we've used for the past 12 months and retool that in the face of new information. So the first thing I'd say is, are we able to bring in the results that we need in the face of changing circumstances? There are precursors to those results that are important for managers. You never simply manage sales. That's the outcome. You're managing the things that contribute and drive sales. These are often behaviors or specific activities. So you want to understand it. If, for example, you're asking the sales organization to do something differently, what are the behaviors that you're expecting there? And can you observe adoption of those new behaviors? This has been around a while, this sort of framework for thinking about training or new programs you develop is especially fitting for sales. But if you're, asking people to do something differently, you need to educate them on it. And to test for effectiveness, you'd want to maybe first test for, do they understand the change? The second thing you'd want to do is test for, are they exhibiting the behaviors coincident with being successful given the new change? And then third and lastly, you test for results. You'd expect to see the results. So that's a simple framework maybe for thinking about how you go about measuring change effectiveness.
Well, thank you. That with the Q&A sort of started to blow up towards the end, Bob, and we're not able to get to all of those questions. But I know from the chat, people have really appreciated what you shared today, and I hope that many of them will consider going to your sales and sales management a course that's coming up later in the year. I'm going to hand over to Heather to close us out. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much, Nicola, and thank you, Bob, for the insights today. Having started my career in sales and then moved into sales training and sales management, so much of this rings true. It's amazing how much things have changed and then how many things have stayed the same in the function. So thank you for sharing your insight today. I really appreciate you joining us. So as Nicola said, my name is Heather Dufault. I am part of the open enrollment team with the Goizueta Business School, and I really appreciate you all sharing your morning with us today. I'll take a few minutes to again just share what's coming up with our short courses. But before I do that, I want to tell you a little bit more about what's coming up for our next Business Over Breakfast in the series. So on February 15th, we're going to talk about leveraging AI to scale ethical decision-making in business with Carl Kunert. On March 7th, we're going to talk about demystifying gravitas with Allison Gilmore. And then on March 21st, we're going to talk about how multicultural marketing is essential to drive future growth. And this is with Ivan Ibarra. So again, just one more touch point with the courses that are coming up. We touched on these, and some of this information has already been put in the chat and will be dropped in there again. But we've got our managerial leadership program coming up. That's in April and May. It's in person. We've got one of our popular courses, Executive Communication and Leadership Presence, also in person in April. And then finally, and we would love to see you join us, the Sales and Sales Management MBA level course that is in May. This is with Bob Kelly, our faculty today. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you, and we hope to see you at a future presentation or one of our courses. Thanks again.